although not to this extreme. In the 1960s, the cultural left got a hold of a lot of the gears of power, and things did not go well. I try not to be too much of a pundit, but I genuinely believe that the spirit of leftism, while I'm glad for classical liberalism, the modern day spirit of leftism is bad, not good, and it leads in bad directions. And so, whenever the left gains control, there is something at odds with the human spirit and flourishing that gets rebuked. And that's what happened at the end of the 1960s and the rise of Nixon and conservatism. And the unfortunate thing is that leftism has continued to push and gain control over the gears of power and shift things in our nation and in our culture so that we become much more accepting of licentiousness and immorality. And so there was a genuine question if this is just going to continue on and we're going to continue to see moral degradation. Things have gone very far in this nation towards leftism. And so the first article I had for us to look at today is New York Post article from the other day. New York Times admits woke ideology is losing its grip in the country. This is a short piece. I just thought it was helpful to think through what just happened. This was written, of course, before election night. Says the New York Times admitted in a news analysis over the weekend that woke ideology that peaked in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd in 2020 has largely dissipated this election cycle, as Democrats shun calls to defund the police and to decriminalize border crossings. Jeremy Peters, a national reporter for the newspaper, wrote a story titled "In Shift from 2020, Identity Politics Loses Its Grip on the Country." Peters noted in the analysis that VP Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee, quote, is boasting about protecting her home with a Glock, proclaiming her patriotism, and campaigning with Republicans like Liz Cheney. So those are some fun reminder photos. And there's Liz Cheney and Kamala Harris right there. And they're a lovely commercial. During this election, Harris has also been reminding voters of the drug dealers she put in prison when she was a prosecutor in California. Harris has also displayed a change in tone on gender identity issues, unlike in 2019 when she introduced herself during a CNN town hall by noting that her pronouns were she, her, and hers. Today, she, quote, changes the topic when asked, end quote, if she would have taxpayers foot the bill for sex change operations for detained migrants and prisoners, according to Peters. So what this is highlighting is there was a time in 2020, 2021, and in the years ensuing where radical social shift, overt social shift was proclaimed by many leaders in the Democrat Party, including Kamala Harris, where there was rampant gender ideology. You saw this in the United Methodist Church at the last General Conference, where they had to say what their preferred pronouns were anytime they got up to speak. That became normative on the left. Open borders became normative on the left. There were a number of issues where the right was overtly assaulted, and there was an overt attempt to move the culture left. And as Election Day came closer, they came to understand a lot of people don't like that. And so they backed off from that in the campaign. The Times reporter noted that large companies were rolling back their diversity, equity, and inclusion policies amidst a harsh backlash online from conservatives. So that's the anti-racist stuff that the Global Methodist Church is going to struggle with. The United Methodist Church has already given itself over to where you see people not as individually made in God's image, but as members of larger constituencies or groups where you prejudge them and then you exercise modern-day discrimination to undo previous discrimination. So a lot of these corporations adopted these DEI policies to practice discrimination in the workplace, and now they're rolling those things back. So one of the people that rang that bell a long time about how big a problem that was is Vivek Ramaswamy. He started a Strive investment fund to intentionally reward companies that didn't adopt DEI policies, and I happen to be invested in Strive. If you don't know how to put your money there, that's through Robinhood is like the easiest way. The article also recounted how top universities have stopped requiring job applicants to sign diversity statements, personal documents attesting to their commitment to diversity. Even terms like Latinx, I never learned if it's Latinx or Latinx, are no longer required as references to Latinos. Peters cited polling from 2020 and this year, which showed that less than 5% of Latinos had used the gender neutral term. And so this is something that I've taken note of before. I think I've talked about it. There's a lot of this gender ideology. The hope was that the Democrats could capitalize on all the hard work they did with the poor and working class voters decades ago, and that they could convince them that these ideologies are for their own good. These luxury beliefs, as Rob Henderson calls them, are actually for the good of the poor. But it just doesn't fit. And no matter how much propaganda you have, Kamala Harris raised more money than Donald Trump. The whole legacy media apparatus was there for her disposal. She was given coverage on SNL in the last week that was not extended to Trump, which breaks FCC guidelines. All of this stuff still could not, it's putting lipstick on a pig. It's just not appealing to people. And so I remember when Donald Trump was elected the first time, there were editorials going, this is a sign, we need to understand this. And what you had was a very recalcitrant response. We're not going to understand this. They are racist bigots, and they are our enemies. And even as recently as last week, President Biden compared, he said very explicitly that Donald Trump's supporters are trash. And so what should follow, what I'm praying for, is a moment of reckoning where we realize that things have gone pretty far and that you see some humility on the left and some graciousness on the right that can allow for the temperature to get turned down